Hi, this is National Master Dan Heisman, and we're here with another video to help you improve your chess game. If you haven't told your chess friends about my channel, Dan Heisman Chess, I have a video on about every kind of important improvement idea. All the things that my students have done wrong over the years have made their ways into these videos. So if you're wondering what people do wrong and how to fix them, then these videos are probably for you. All right. So this is a position that last week at our chess club, one of our 1700 players lost something similar. And I checked to see if I had a video that was very similar to this, and I couldn't find one, so let's do it this time. All right, this is white to play. And when I give my students puzzles, I don't like to give them too much information. Like in a book, it's white to play and win, white to play and draw, white to play and mate in 3. I just tell them white to play and play the best move they can. If white's winning, then find the way to win. If white needs to draw, then find the way to draw. If white is losing, then you're going to figure out, oh my goodness, white's in a bad situation, and I've learned that no matter what white does, he's going to lose. So it's more like a real game that way, because in a real game, of course, no one holds up a sign and tells you exactly what you're trying for. You're trying for the most you possibly can, and that's what I like to do in a lot of my puzzles. If it's definitely white to play and mate in 17 or something, well, then you pretty much have to tell them. All right, so this is white to play. And as with all my videos where there's positions like this, you can always pause the video for as long as you want, try to work it out for yourself, and then, start the video again and see if your analysis is correct. So I'm going to assume that if you're going to do that, you've already done it or you're doing it right now. So let's get going on what might happen. All right, so let's try the most obvious thing, which is white is the first one to go after the pawns, and he plays the beginner obvious move, king to d5. All right, what would black do? Well, black's not going to let him just take off that pawn and run his pawn down and win, so the obvious move that black could try is to guard it with king f4. And this is a very special position which has a name. This is called Trebuchet. Trebuchet is an ancient catapult, and the reason they call it Trebuchet is if you draw a line through these 4 pieces, it looks a little bit like the trebuchet. So it's Trebuchet. Now Trebuchet is what's called mutual zugzwang. If you haven't seen my earlier video on zugzwang, I probably threw in a trebuchet maybe somewhere. But anyway, Trebuchet, mutual zugzwang, means that whoever is to move is in trouble. He's the one who has to move out of the way. And unfortunately for white, since he was the first one to move in, he's also got to be the first one to move out. And now he's in big trouble because black's threatening to take the pawn on e4, and white can't stop him. If he continues to counterattack the black pawn, then when black takes the pawn, he's going to be guarding it. And if he tries to come back, it's too late. Black will take, white will go here. And now I use what I call the Ole maneuver. Ole maneuver means use your king to block out his king, and keep your king in front, right in the same file in front of the pawn until the last minute, and move out of the way. So you play king to d3. If white plays king to c2, king to e3, then king to e2. And now you're going to just ole him. He's going to wait here, hoping to get behind the pawn. You're going to just push the pawn while he's waiting. And now you do the ole, move out of the way, and you get a queen. All right, so let's go back to the start. So we can now see that king d5, allowing black to set up trebuchet with white to move, is a mistake. And black is going to win. So white can't do that. So what can white do? Well, white can wait. He could play king to c5 and say, all right, you go in first, and then when I go in, you'll be the one in zugzwang and you'll win. The problem is that if you do that, black doesn't have to play king to f4. Black can play a very well-known maneuver, which is to attack the pawn from f3 and avoid setting up trebuchet. Now again, black's threatening to take the pawn and win exactly like we saw before. But if white guards the pawn now with king d5, then again, he's the first one getting to this position. Black says, that's exactly what I want, and I'll play king f4, and shazam, we've got another trebuchet, and black's winning again. So if white plays king to d5, he loses. If white plays king to c5, he loses. It's very good to understand in this kind of position that if you can play king f3 for black, that you're winning because you have the threat of taking the pawn, and the only move that stops you from taking the pawn is to allow trebuchet. Okay, so back to the start again. So white can't play up to the 5th rank. Obviously, going further away doesn't help. Black will just come over and take the pawn. So what should white do? Well, suppose he comes back to try to guard the pawn. Plays king to d3. Now black can put white in zugzwang again by playing either king f3 or king f4, and white will have to abandon the pawn. But does that mean that white has to lose? Well, let's take a look at what happens on king f3 first, and then we'll look at king f4. Suppose black plays king f3. Then white is in zugzwang and he has to wait, so he may as well play king to d2. And now black plays king takes e4. Can white hold this position? Well, if you watched my earlier video, two-part video on king and pawn against king, if the king is on the rank immediately in front of the pawn and the king is not yet to the 6th, 7th, or 8th rank when you have a tic-tac-toe, here he's not, he's on the 5th rank, then if white can get the opposition, white can draw. Well, how do you get the opposition? You go across from the king, there's no pawns in the way, there's one square in between, and whosever move it is does not have the opposition. Well, it's black's move, so he doesn't have the opposition, which means white does have the opposition. So white has the opposition. That means white's going to get what he wants. He's going to get a draw if he knows how to do this. If you haven't seen the other video, I'll just do it really quickly. Black will go out of the way. White will keep the opposition. If black keeps going back and forth, white will just keep going with him and get a threefold repetition. Eventually, black would have to push the pawn. Now we have the famous situation where the king and the pawn, the king's not in front of the pawn. So the two rules for white are: 1, don't let the king in front of the pawn, and 2, when the pawn gets to the 6th rank, goes straight back on the file the pawn is on. Right now the pawn's only on the 5th rank. I mean, it's on the 4th, but it's the black's 5th rank. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So here, the 6th rank for black would actually be rank number 3. I know that's a little confusing, but we're looking at it in algebraic. You're always looking at it from white's point of view, but from black's point of view, when the pawn gets up to black's 6th rank, which is the 3rd rank here, then you have to go straight back. Well, here you just want to follow the rule: don't let the king in front of the pawn. So if you go back, he's going to go in front of the pawn, and you don't want to do that. So you play here to prevent the black king from getting in front of the pawn. If he goes back, you just block again. He waits. Here it doesn't matter where you go as long as you go back. You can't go up. He'll come up and win. But you can go back anywhere you want. You don't have to go straight back. If you learn the rule that you have to go straight back, well, that's sufficient to draw, but it's not necessary. Here black plays up. Again, the rule is don't let him in front of the pawn and rank in front of the pawn. You have to play here. So at some point he's going to push the pawn, and now that pawn is on the 6th rank for black, and white has 4 moves, but only one of them draws. He has to go straight back. King straight back. If the king comes up, you play your king over here. Some people call that the opposition. I don't call that the opposition because the king's not in front of the pawn. I reserve the word opposition for when the king's in front of the pawn, but that's just semantics. If your coach calls that the opposition, that's fine. But in any case, white's got the right tempos. Black cannot make progress. For instance, if he pushes the pawn, white goes here. And now black has his choice of draws. He can stalemate. That's what most people do. Or you can move away from the pawn and let him take it. Either way, it's going to be a draw. Let's go back and go over that again. Okay, white to play, king here. Black played king f3. We're going to look at king f4 next. King to c2 waiting. King takes, opposition. Moves out of the way, keeps the opposition. Eventually has to push the pawn. Don't let him in front of the pawn. Pawn pushes. Pawn's on the 6th rank. Got to go straight back. Straight back. If he comes up, go over here. You want to call that opposing the king? Okay. You want to call that the opposition? Okay. I call it opposing the king, but not the opposition. Doesn't matter. Just semantics. Pawn push. King here. King here. Stalemate. Draw. Okay. Now let's look at the other line. King to d3. King to f4. Well, again, it looks like white could go anywhere he wants and wait. But that's why king f4 is better than king f3. In king f4, you're giving white a chance to go wrong. And that's what you want to do. Because if white doesn't understand this position, and he thinks, oh man, I need to get in front of that pawn, and he blunders here with king to e2, then when you take the pawn, it's white's move, and black has the opposition, and now black's going to win. For instance, king d2, king f3, making progress. If king d3, then check, and king d2, and then back king here, and then you get a queen. On the other hand, if white goes king to e1, black goes king to e3, and in this position, it doesn't matter whose move it is. This is tic-tac-toe, as I talk in my previous video, where you come one square back from the promoting square. If your king gets onto any of those 9 squares, and your pawn is in a lower rank and you're not trivially losing the pawn, then it doesn't matter whose move it is. It doesn't matter where the kings are. It's always a win. Very, very strong rule. So here, white would go out of the way. It's white's turn, but it doesn't matter whose turn it is. Black would go there. White, king f2. You push the pawn. All right, let's go back to the start again. So after king d3, it's better for black to play king f4. Why? Because it gives white a chance to go wrong. White could go to the square, which gives black the chance to capture the pawn and get the opposition. So therefore, what does white need to do? What white needs to do now is not go to the e2 square until black takes the pawn. So he has to go to a square that touches e2. And this is a very important concept I've talked about in other videos. This is what I call the dance around concept. And this is what the 1700 player did not know. He didn't know about the dance around. And he was low on time, so he didn't have time to figure it out. So what you need to do is go to any square that touches e2. Well, right now there's only one square he can go to that touches e2, so he has to play king to d2. And now if black takes the pawn, you jump onto e2 and you get the opposition, and you get the draw. So let's say black doesn't do that. Let's say black says, I'm going to give you more chances to go wrong and plays here. Well, now you could come up and keep guarding the pawn, but even better is to tell black, I know what's going on here. I'm just going to touch this square. If I was playing white here, I would play a move like king to d1 and say, I know what's going on. All right, if black ever takes the pawn, you jump on e2. If he keeps waiting and he plays here, of course you don't play here. You keep dancing around. You play king to e1. He can dance around too if he wants, waiting for you to make this mistake to jump on e2. You don't do it. You just touch it. Eventually he gives up. He takes the pawn. You say, thank you very much. You jump here, and now we get that same draw as before. Don't let him in front. When the pawn gets to the 6th, go straight back. Pawn push, king here, king here. All right, so why after king d3, king f4, why is king f4 better? They're both draws because it's a better move if you give your opponent a chance to make a mistake. Even though the evaluation is the same, you want to make moves that give your opponent a chance to go wrong. If you go here, he can't go to the wrong square to e2. You're pretty much forcing him to do this, and when he takes here, he might figure out that getting the opposition is a draw. But if he doesn't understand this, like the 1700 player had trouble doing, and you play here, maybe in time trouble or whatever, if he's not very good, he'll go here, and when you take, he'll win. Black will win here. Let's say king back to here, it doesn't matter. King here, pawn push, and he gets a queen. All right, so you always want to give your opponent a chance to go wrong. Can white also draw with king to c3? Yes, he can, because he can touch the square on the next move. Doesn't matter what black plays. He could play f4, he could play f3. Now you want to touch this square. Doesn't matter whether you play king d3 or king d2. I would probably just play king d2 and say, let's get it over with. And now if black says, oh, I'm not going to take the pawn, I'll give you a chance. If you want to guard the pawn, you can. I think I would play like king to d1 and say, yeah, I know what's going on here. And eventually when he takes the pawn, I jump on this square. If he doesn't take the pawn, I just dance around squares that touch e2. I'm dancing around the e2 square, but not going on it until he takes the pawn. That's the dance around maneuver. That's one of the main ideas of today's video. Alright, so let's go all the way back to the start. So now we know white has to play king c3 or king d3, do a dance around, and he gets a draw. If he tries to play offense by going to the 5th rank, then he actually loses. That's a little counterintuitive, but once you study this a little bit, and if you don't understand this, you could watch the video again, you could play it out with an engine, you could play it out with a friend. You know, you want to learn this stuff because it comes up quite often in these kind of endgames. It's not a rare endgame kind of idea. All right, let's move both kings up a rank and see what's going on. So I call this my dance around 2 position. All right, so now it's white to play again. And again, obviously, from what we learned in the previous video, king d5 is a double question mark move. Black plays king f4, and voila, Trebuchet, mutual zugzwang. White has to move away. White loses. Just to remind you how that works, king here, king c3, king e3. This is my ole maneuver. And you win. Okay, so king to d5, you should know by now that that's not right. Well, can you wait like you did before and play here first? Well, you can, but if you do that, then black will go here, and we've transposed into the other problem with white to play, and we know that's a draw if you go. So if you wanted a draw, you could do that. All right, but actually white has a good move here, and it's the mirror image of what we already looked at in an earlier line where, let's go back to the previous position. If you remember, we said white should not play king to c5 because black will play king to f3, hitting the pawn, and if white tries to guard it, black gets trebuchet. We looked at that already. But now we have if we go back to the start, we have the exact same position, but with white to play, kind of like if you flip the board upside down, white can do the same thing to black now. So instead of coming back to c4 and getting a draw, and instead of going to d5 and losing, the right move in this kind of position is to hit the pawn from the diagonal with king to d6. And now black has to guard his pawn. King takes, e5 is threatened, followed by the ole maneuver where you bring your king up along the file and you just win. So he has no choice. He has to try to guard his pawn. Whoops. Can't guard it with king to f4, of course, because king to d5 is a trebuchet and black loses. So what black has to do is now black has to come back, and when white plays king d5, black cannot play here. Black has to dance around. So black should play king to f7. It's the exact same thing we just looked at, except upside down. Let's go through that again to show you. White's best try is to play king d6. It doesn't win, but it forces black to understand what's going on. Black has to play here, and when white plays here, black has to play king f7. And now if white doesn't take the pawn, black will continue to dance around the e7 square. Dance around it, don't go on it. Finally, white will take, black will go here, and again, it's always good to play this out just to remember what to do. Draw. All right, so in this endgame, white should try this move, where he goes on the offense and he makes black show that he knows what to do. If white plays here, and black plays here, here, and white plays here, black plays here, then white's the one who's trying to draw. Let's do that again. If white plays here, black plays here, this is the same as what we just looked at before. White is going to have to come back and dance around and get his draw. Well, that means that white has to know what to do. If white goes here, he loses right away. So the best move is here. That doesn't mean that white's winning. It just means it gives white the best chance. It's now black has to know what to do. Can't go for trebuchet. has to go for dance around. And here is our dance around. King to e7 loses. Let's show you that again. White takes. Black's the one in zugzwang here with white having the opposition. Moves out of the way. White makes progress. Here, here, out of the way. Here, here, pawn here, and you get a queen. Okay, so with the kings up one like this, it's still a draw, but now black's the one who has to know about the dance around. All right, white's the one who's going to put the pressure on black. White's going to play here. Just because two different moves are draws doesn't mean they're equally good unless you're both engines. If you're playing a human and they might make a mistake, it's all if you have multiple lines that draw, you want to play the one that gives your opponent the most chance to go wrong, where he needs the most knowledge and the most accurate moves. So in that sense, they're not equal. They're only theoretically equal. From a practical standpoint, they're not equal at all. So if white plays king c4, he's the one trying to draw and he can get it. If white plays king to d6, then black's the one trying to draw and he can get it too. But you want to always be the guy in charge, the one who is trying to test your opponent to see if he knows how to draw. You don't want to be the one that's being tested to see if you know how to draw. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So now that brings us to our dance around 3 puzzle, which is suppose the kings start and they're not on the same rank. Suppose both kings are on the rank of the opposite pawn, like this. And to some extent, we could look at the position with the kings like this. We'll do that next, I guess. If the kings are like this, we've actually seen this kind of position before. Can you remember what to do? The answer is attack the pawn on the diagonal. And now, if he doesn't guard it and tries to come back, it's too late for dance around. Instead, we get the ole win like that. But if you attack it on the diagonal and he guards it, then you trebuchet and you win. So in this position, whoever is to move will attack the pawn from the diagonal and win. Okay, so if it's black's move here, he'll play king f3, and after white plays king d5, he'll play king f4. If it's white's move, which is the way I've set it up, then the only right move is king to d6, threatening to take the pawn, and after king f4, king d5 trebuchet, black has to move away and white wins. All right, let's set up the position. We'll add a new chapter. Let's do it where the kings are on the same, they're on the different files, but they're on the same file as their color, like that. Okay, white to play here. Well, clearly white can't play king to d5 because king here is trebuchet. But if he plays king to, whoops, I accidentally made it black to move. We wanted white to move. All right, let's do that. White to play. So you can't play king to d5. What happens if you play king to c5? Well, now black's the one who can't come in because he loses to trebuchet. And if black plays king to g4, he loses to what we just saw with king to e6. So what white may as well do is just, in this case, he may as well just run down and dance around and get a draw. Because if he goes here, well, I guess if he goes here, that's true. Black, if white goes king c5, black can just dance around and draw. So maybe white should play king c5 and put black on the defensive. All right, so king to c5. If king to g4, then king to e6, king f4, king d5 wins. So black can't do that. So after white starts with king c5, black can simply play king here. White will play here to try to give black a chance to go wrong. Black will do dance around and play king f7. King takes, king here. Black has the opposition draw. So that's white's best chance, because if he comes back, then black will win the pawn, and white's the one who had. So if white comes back, he gets a draw by dancing around. If he goes king c5, then black gets a draw by dancing around, but then white's the one who's at least trying to win. So in this position, white may as well play king to c5. Take all those arrows off the board. Let's go back to that previous one. When we start with this position, where the kings are on the same rank as the opposite color of the pawn, anytime the king is not attacking your pawn, and you can go diagonal and attack his pawn, attack it from diagonal. That's what you want to do. This is key, just to remember this, because then when he tries to guard the pawn, you create Trebuchet, mutual zugzwang. Black has to move and he loses. So this position white to play wins. All right? These situations are good to study because even if the kings are in different squares further away, you can get to these kind of positions and you can create the same kind of situations that we talked about in today's video. And if the kings start closer where they're already in Trebuchet, then you know what's going on too. Once you master these ideas in this video, then these positions where each side has one pawn left on the same rank, especially where they're up against each other in a ram, you'll know what to do. All right, hopefully you enjoyed today's video. If you did, you can like the video. Please tell your friends about the channel. If you haven't subscribed, you can do that too. And we will see you next time. Thanks. Bye.